Hey, this is Pastor Dave. Welcome back to our series on the biblical feasts, the seven feasts that are talked about in the Old Testament. Today we're going to begin to touch on the Feast of Passover and look at really what is this all about and how do things that we practice today actually come from Passover. Hope it's challenging and encouraging to you.
I would like to start our morning by reading Isaiah 53:1. It says, "Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" We're actually going to come back to that verse. Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? We've started into a series talking about biblical feasts. There's a ton of information. In fact, I'm just going to start to talk about Passover today. We're going to talk about it some more next week. We're actually going to do communion next week. But we're going to do it, and you're going to see things and understand things about the Last Supper that you've never seen before. We're actually going to do communion with matzah, which is an unleavened bread. And you're going to see where exactly in the Seder meal and the Passover meal did the Last Supper actually happen, because it was part of Passover. There's 4 cups in the Passover. Which one was it that he said, "Take this cup and drink"? We're going to find that out next week. Things like when they left, they sang some hymns, and then we know what they sang. We're going to find that out next week. Some cool stuff. And we said, why is this important? It's important because it has literally everything to do with the history of the Church of Jesus Christ worldwide in the past and going ahead. So I want to take a minute and just do a really brief light speed trip through the beginning of the Bible and like how this all started, okay? So if you aren't super well versed in the Bible, here's the basic gist. So creation happens. We have probably 15 to 1700 years between Adam and Noah's flood. God decides to flood the entire earth. Only Noah, his wife, 3 sons and their wives survive. Now, many people believe that what's left of the ark is actually in Turkey on the side of a mountain, and it's actually known thereby as, well, that's Noah's Ark. And the name of the valley just below that actually means Valley of 8, if that's interesting to you. There's plenty on YouTube you can look at about this thing, but this happened about 4,400 years ago. God flooded the entire earth. Now, if he flooded the entire earth, you would expect that you would find millions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And you actually find millions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Because the flood really happened. Because that book talks about things that really happened. And a man who really came and really died for really you to really believe and really go to heaven. Really soon, maybe. You don't know. Annette's husband will be like, "Dave's world ending today?" The other day I walked over the house, he's like, "Yeah, the world didn't end." I said, "I didn't say it was going to." I said, "Maybe. I don't know." So a couple of hundred years after this big flood happens, you have this man born named Abraham, and he is the father of the nation of Israel. He's the man that God says, "Look up at the stars and see if you can number them, so will your descendants be." He has a son named Isaac. God calls him to sacrifice him and then provides a sacrifice. Total mirror of who Jesus is. Well, Abraham has a son named Isaac, who has a son named Jacob, who's a swindler. And Jacob, his name is changed to Israel. He has 12 sons. These are the tribes of Israel. Well, while those 12 sons were alive, you remember one of them's name was Joseph. And he had a coat of many colors, and his brothers hated him, probably because he was a spoiled brat, arrogant kid who was favored by his dad. He was the child of his dad's favorite wife. Now, back then, Jacob had 2 wives, and it's a long story. Not really the way God designed it ever to be, but that's what it was then. So Joseph's brothers sell him into Egypt. And then his father finds out that he's still alive when his brothers go down to buy grain because there's a famine in the whole land, and Joseph becomes a ruler in Egypt because he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Well, now you have the nation of Israel. Well, at the time it's only about 75 people. They move down to Egypt where Joseph is, and they're given favor and they're given rich lands. But over the next few hundred years, they become slaves. And we believe that they spent about 400 years in Egypt. And they were slaves. And now comes in the Ten Commandments movie, where Moses, what's happening is the children of Israel getting really numerous. So the Pharaoh says, well, to all the midwives in Egypt, if it's a male, kill it, because they were getting afraid that the Israelites were going to get powerful enough to take over. So they're killing all the male children, and Moses' mom and dad decide to hide him in a basket in the bulrushes on the Nile River. And it just so happens that Pharaoh's daughter finds him. And his sister is smart enough to say, "Oh, would you like me to find a handmaid for you to help raise him?" "Why, yes." So she goes and gets her mom. And Moses' mama raises him till he's weaned, and then he goes to live with the Pharaoh's daughter and is raised as a prince of Egypt. Well, as he gets older, he's probably 40 or so years old, he realizes that he's a Hebrew. And one day he sees one of his fellow Hebrews being beaten by an Egyptian taskmaster, and he strikes down the taskmaster and kills him and buries him in the sand. Like the next day, he's talking to these two Hebrew men who are fighting, and he says, "Why are you fighting your brothers?" And they say, "Well, what are you going to, you think you're the boss over us? You're going to kill one of us and bury us like you did the Egyptian?" He realized it's known, and he flees Egypt. He flees to a land called Midian, and he lives there for 40 years before the burning bush experience even happens. So when that happens, he's 80 years old. This is where we get the name I Am, which Jesus, by the way, ties himself back to in John 8, saying, "I am." We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So these people are in Egypt, and Moses, God says, "Go down," sends his brother with him. All these things happen, like they throw down their staff, turns into a snake, and all this crazy stuff. "Let my people go." "Okay, I will." "No, I won't." "Plague." "Okay, I will." "No, I won't." "Plague." "Okay, I will." "No, I won't." "Plague." I won't do the other 7. What not a lot of people know is that every one of the plagues that fell on Egypt coincides with an Egyptian god. So he's like, God of the sun, darkness. God of the dust, lice. God of the water, Nile turns to blood. Every one of them is literally like, "Oh, you have a god? I can trump that." "Oh, you have another god? I can trump that." So God, in the eyes of Israel and Egypt, says that god, that god, that god, times 9. And the last plague is the death of the firstborn. So God tells Moses, I almost said Noah, God tells Moses that the death angel, the angel of death, is going to pass over the land. And he institutes what we now have as Passover. This is where it starts. And he says, "I want you to take a 1-year-old male lamb without blemish. Kill the lamb, don't break any of its bones. Take its blood with hyssop and spread it on the doorposts and the lintel of your home. And any home that has that blood on the doorposts, the death angel will pass over, and no one in that home will die. Outside of there, every male, firstborn, animal, and man will die. Will die." And they did. Egypt lost probably thousands and thousands in that night. And then Pharaoh finally says, "Get out of here, leave," because Pharaoh lost his own son. And then we have the Red Sea crossing and the Egyptians getting buried in the Red Sea, which, by the way, they have found chariots on the bottom of the Red Sea in one specific place, like a line of them. So, like I said, this really happened. You're walking on the same dirt all this happened on. Okay? Same moon in the sky. Moses looked up and saw the moon that you see every night that it's not cloudy. So that night, they did several things. They ate unleavened bread. They ate bitter herbs as a representation of the hardship that they had in Egypt. They spread the blood, and they ate this lamb that they sacrificed, knowing the next day that they would be leaving Egypt. Part of it was unleavened bread. He said, "Get rid of all the leaven, make unleavened bread, because you are not going to have time to let bread rise." Unleavened bread, and they left Egypt eating unleavened bread. That's what matzah is, and that's how Passover fits in. So this is the first of the 7 feasts, and it is all about Israel leaving a land of bondage and slavery. Okay? There are 7 feasts, by the way. 4 in the spring, already been fulfilled. 3 in the fall, haven't been fulfilled yet. So when you look at these feasts, you might think, "Oh, well, these are old Bible things all the Jews have done forever and ever." Only 4 of the 7 have been fulfilled. There are 3 left to go yet. So if the first 7 were appointed times that God laid out literally in the stars, he says, why would we not pay attention to the ones that aren't here yet, right? Jesus talks about them. That's a picture of matzah right there. One of the cool things about matzah is that it's pierced so that it doesn't fluff at all. And most matzah, when you take it out of a box, you'll see it next week, it's pierced and striped. And this is a bread used by Orthodox Jews. They don't recognize Jesus at all, but they use a bread that's pierced and striped. This would have been the bread that he used when he broke the bread, a specific piece that we'll talk about next week, and said, "This is my body given for you." So they've had this sinless, leaven represents sin, this sinless bread, one of three, that's broken for them. And by the way, this was celebrated. Some people might think, oh, this is one of those things that they instituted to kind of because it's about Jesus. This is not about Jesus for Orthodox Jews at all. They, to this day, most reject Jesus as the Messiah. But Passover has been practiced for at least 1,000 years before Jesus ever showed up. So all the things I bring up today and next week about Passover and how it mirrors Jesus, that all was happening for 1,000 years before he ever showed up, and a lot of people still don't see him in it. You're going to see something as we end today that is absolutely mind-bogglingly awesome that points immediately right to Jesus. All this is in the Word. Parables that Jesus told mirror Passover. It's amazing. Passover is really a feast, a celebration that's about moving from slavery to freedom. This is for today. There are lives that are in slavery that he wants to move to freedom. That's why the program that we're running for people who are battling addictions and their families, the whole message is there's an answer, but it's not inside of you. It's outside of you, and it has to come into you and change things. It literally has to change the sin nature. Remember last week we talked about unleavened bread and how they would go around the house and look for that last piece of bread, and they would sweep it up onto a wooden spoon and then wrap it in a cloth and take it outside the home and burn it, right? Sin brings death and loss and pain. The unleavened bread, the sinless, leaven is again a symbol of sin. His life, sinless, is the answer. His death for us, the blood he shed that we put on the doorposts of our heart and our homes and lives, is a representation of the answer for what's wrong in this world. If your life is one that feels like you're a slave to things you'd like to not do but you do, a slave to attitudes and beliefs and just feeling hopeless in life and knowing that if you have to stand on your own 2 feet before God, you are in huge trouble. That's the shackles. And he wants to take you from a place of slavery and loss to a place of freedom. Paul talks in the book of Galatians about 2 children. One's a child of freedom and one's a child of slavery. The slave is the one who just looks at the rules and does the best they can. They'll always be a slave. They'll never be free. The free child is the one who says, there's one who paid for me, and I'm his, and he's mine, and I'm in love with him, and he runs my life, and I am free. I want to talk about something real. I'm going to go back one slide here. There are some really cool questions that Jewish children ask every Passover. There's 4 questions, very specific, that they always ask. Number 1, why is tonight different than any other night? Why do we recline at the table? They would actually sit on the floor and recline. Slaves never recline while they eat. Only free men do. That's the answer. Why tonight do we only eat unleavened bread? Because the night has come when God is going to take his own blood and sweep the sin onto the wooden cross and wrap it in grave clothes and burn it. That's not what they tell the Jewish children at the Seder meal. Okay? But that's the truth. Okay? Why do we only eat unleavened bread? Because we're wiping the sin out of our lives. Well, if you look at what they're wiping it onto, that wooden cross, that wooden spoon, and burning it, he is giving them the answer. Right? For as by one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, so by one man. It's paid for. And the last question is, why tonight do we dip the bread when all other nights we don't? Now, I am going to leave more details of the Passover on the side than I can possibly mention in a month of Sundays. But one of the things they do is they take a piece of this unleavened bread and they break it and they dip it into bitter herbs, part of which is horseradish. And there's also a mixture of apples and dates and raisins that's very sweet, that's meant to represent the mortar of the bricks that they had to make and build with in Egypt. So they scoop a little bit of both onto the piece of unleavened bread. I'll give you a peek into next week. When Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and they're, which one? Is it me? Is it me? Which one? And he says, the one who dips the sop with me is the one who will betray me. What you don't understand is at the Seder meal, the person who's running the meal would sit at a horseshoe-like table here. The youngest would be at his right. That's John, who's leaning on him. And the oldest would be to his left. We know that Judas was the oldest of the disciples because he was immediately to Jesus' left and was the only one other than John who could have possibly dipped his piece of bread in this mixture with Jesus. Now here's the crazy thing. So you take the unleavened bread, which is Jesus, the one who will carry all of our sin and burden, and you dip him into those things, piling them on him, and then you put into your life his willingness to carry those things. Who else was it that piled those things onto him? Judas. So together, they symbolically fulfill what he will be with that little piece of matzah, the bitter herbs, and the mixture that represents the toil. Together they dip it, and Jesus is saying, I am the bread of life. And he's literally saying, all these things that I'm moving you out of, I am piling on my back. Put this into your life. Isn't that amazing? That's a little bit of the story of the one who dips with. That's what happened. It's actually the bitter herbs in this mixture that they did. Crazy. There are at least 10 times more of these things than I could possibly share with you. It just blows my mind. I want to show you a picture here that's extremely important. What they would do is when the death angel was coming into Egypt, they would, and this only was one night, they would take the blood of this lamb, put it on the lintel and the doorposts, and many of them were wood. This one is stone in the picture. But the death angel would pass over, and everyone in that home, all the firstborn males in that home, would be safe. Now, one thing you have to realize in this is if you were a Ra, the sun god worshiping Egyptian who got scared and knew an Israelite family, so you decided, oh, I'm just going to be in their house tonight and I might as well play it safe. No sense taking any chances. What could it hurt? You were safe. If you were a direct descendant of Moses and you were out in the street when the angel came, you were dead. There is no salvation by association here. You are either under the blood or you're not. Did not matter who you were. If Moses had been in the street, he would have died. If the Pharaoh had been in Moses' house and his son, he wouldn't have died. This was about, are you under the blood and trusting in that or not? There is no, my dad's a Christian, my grandma prays for me. It's not how it works. This is a to-the-man choice to go through that door with blood on it and be inside of this promise or not. Now, what's interesting is if you took that blood and put it right in the center on the top and on the two sides, that blood on the top would have dripped onto the ground. And a lot of people say, well, look at that. It makes the shape of a cross. One other kind of interesting thing is that if you take between the two sides and up to the top, it makes a triangle this way, right? And people say, well, that's man saying to God, I'm going to trust you. An arrow pointing up, man saying, I'm going to look up. And they say on the cross, it's the two sides, his hands and feet, and it makes a triangle pointing down. And it's God saying, I'm coming down and reaching down. The really cool thing is if you take those two triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down, and you put them together, it makes the Star of David, which is on Israel's flag. They don't yet recognize that Jesus is their Messiah, but a day is coming when the entire nation will. They will. It's prophesied in the Bible. I want you to see, though, that this wooden post and beam that he was crucified on, the blood was splattered on that, and that is your door today. You are either saved through that door right here, the cross, or you're out on the street. There's no other way. You either are trusting in the blood splattered on the wood to save you from sin and slavery and bondage, and you're counting on that as your exit ticket out of the old stuff, or you're out on the street. There's no two ways. You're either subject to the rules on your own or you're dependent on him. There's no two ways. That is the gospel right there. You're screwed. Good news. Somebody paid for you. Are you coming through the door? You're either inside or you're not. Are you coming through the door? There is no, I love Jesus. I think he's great. I'm going to stay out in the street, though. Dead. This doesn't work that way. You cannot make the rules yourself. You cannot decide for yourself, God's really loving. He wouldn't do that to me. I can dabble over here. I can do over that. I'm going to drive most of the time. When we get close to the toll booth of heaven, I'll move over and let him drive. It just doesn't work that way. The word Lord is master. The word says, one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is the owner and master. The point is to have already declared that when you get there. Because once you're there, when you see him, you'll have no choice but to bow down. It'll just be that way. But it'll be too late. He makes the rules, and he has said, don't wait. Today is the day of salvation. I want to show you one more piece from the Seder meal. This is a shank bone. This would be one of the leg bones from the lamb that was sacrificed. And this is referred to as a zeroha. Okay, they call that. Now, this is Jewish tradition. This does not recognize Jesus at all. This is called the zeroha. The word zeroha in the Bible, it's a Hebrew word, is put in there when you see the phrase like the arm of the Lord, the strength of the Lord. The word is zeroha. So they take this shank bone that's on the Seder plate and they call it, oh, that's the arm of the Lord. That's the strength of the Lord. That's the zeroha. Let me show you something that will absolutely blow your mind. Here's our verse when we started today. It's Isaiah 53:1. It says, who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? To whom has the zeroha been revealed? Now, time out. This is a leg bone from the lamb whose blood saved their tails, whose blood is a representation of a rescue from slavery into freedom. That bone is the lamb that blood came from that's saving them. That's the arm of the Lord. Isaiah 53:1 says, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Let me read to you the rest of the 53rd chapter of Isaiah. Listen to this. This is crazy. Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord, arm there, the word is zeroha, same word they use for the shank bone. To whom has he been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hid their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. This shank bone is sitting next to matzah on a plate that's pierced. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds or stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Before Pilate he was quiet. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgressions of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. He was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man. Yet it was the will of God to crush him, that he put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul shall he see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. By his death will he make many to be accounted as righteous. That's us. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah 53:1 says, to whom has the Zeroha been revealed? To whom has the Lamb been revealed? And then he describes him for us. That's Jesus. Arm right there. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. He is the very way out of slavery and sin into freedom. He is the door. Do you think when we take communion from this day on and recognize, like we will next week, it will take on a whole new meaning? The Last Supper, there's so much richness there that we don't understand at all. But I think we need to. What I'd like to do is, as we come to the times of years that these holidays are, we don't have to celebrate everything down to the letter of what they did, but understanding the meaning of what God instituted, I think is wise, extremely wise. So my challenge for you today is very simple. Are you coming through the door? Or did my mic just die? There it is. Are you out on the street or are you in the house? And it's as simple as, do you depend on the blood to cover your sin? Do you put your life inside of that or not? Isaac, could you grab me a bottle of water from the fridge? As I sip the one I already have. Here's what I want to do this morning. Nate, would you mind playing a little bit for me? Just for a minute. I want to take just a minute, and whether this is something you've considered in the past or decided in the past, if you are realizing the gravity of this and you want to be inside the house, what I'm going to do, and I hadn't really planned this, is I would like for you to actually come up, and we're going to pray right up here. Take just a minute, but I'm going to take a little bit of this water, and I'm going to pour it in your hands as a sign of, I want to be covered by that. I want the guilt on my hands to be washed away. I want something new. I want to start something fresh today. Are you still going to be a human tomorrow? Unfortunately, yes. You will still do things wrong. It's not an excuse to do them, but He wants to own and change your life.
As we wrapped up our service today, we talked about kind of committing to what this whole thing is really all about, realizing that the blood of Christ is about moving over from slavery into freedom. If that's a change you would like to make in your life or like to recommit to in your life, I'd like you to just take a moment now and just talk to the Lord and let him know that and purpose in your heart to chase him with all that you have. Have a great week.